All right, friends, good morning, welcome. Thank you for coming to this. Those of you who will be, somebody asked, this is not live streamed, but it's recorded, so I know a lot of people will see this later on YouTube. So thank you for coming, and this is kind of a kooky idea for a program. At first I wondered why I was doing it. I didn't know if anybody would come, and I'm so glad I dug into this just for me, because it has been fun, and I think it'll be fun for you. As we go through this. I'd mentioned yesterday, I spoke to the one person I know who was present for the very first worship service, Rufus Dalton. So I asked Rufus yesterday, he's almost 101. I said, Rufus, how you feeling? He said, I'm doing much better than I was a year ago. He was doing good a year ago. Anyway, he's amazing. So we'll walk through this pretty interesting stuff, I think you'll find. So, very first worship service, October 1925. So go back in time in your mind to Myers Park. This is our corner back in the day. Pretty interesting. Myers Park had a country club before we had a church. You have to get things in proper order. You know, like we have a country club, maybe we need a church in Myers Park. When the church started, this is like big news, right? So all the newspapers reported on this. You can find these things on our timeline out in the hallway, and it's well worth reading. It's amazing. Like, you know, some men got together, and so I'll just tell you some of it from memory. The first pastor was named Excel Rozelle, right? So that's like, what a name. It's like, it rhymes. Excel Rozelle. And if you're old to Charlotte, you would know Rozzle's Ferry Road, that this is his Rozelle family. He was a descendant of cotton farmers who lived along the river where there was a ferry to get across to Gaston County, hence Rozzle's Ferry. Pre-Civil War, they were cotton farmers here, and you have to assume that was, of course, slave-driven, had to be. He's a descendant of them, and so when the newspaper recounts what happened, they didn't have a name for the church yet, but the first men who gathered together to decide about having a church, they met at the Rozelle Ancestral Home, way out there in Mount Holly. Mount Holly, by the way, I don't know if you know this, is it's the hotbed of birthing great musicians, because Brian Childers, America's greatest bell guy, and Evan Curry, our organist, they're from Mount Holly. I mean, who knew such a place? So they met in the Rozelle Ancestral Home, and pretty interesting, and decided to form a church. It says it's not yet named. Our articles at pains to explain that. You can read all that later. Super fascinating. We have the bulletin from the first Sunday, which is a piece of work. We're going to use some items out of this when we, on October 26th, we couldn't quite get it on the year, when we have our 100th anniversary big blowout worship service. This is the bulletin for Sunday morning, and it's an interesting bulletin because they had an 11 o'clock service in the morning, and they had an evening service. We will begin this. You will be required to come back on Sunday. It's so interesting that they did that, right? Sunday evening. So then some of the announcements, it's hard to see the font here, so I put them in slides. Chad helped me with that where you can see this. So I love this. The bulletin is a heading. We will maintain the bulletin each Sunday. Announcements and items should be given to Mr. J.J. Akers not later than noon Thursdays. We will maintain a bulletin each Sunday. So then it has other announcements. So they're news. They don't know their pastor. So this is interesting. Our pastor is living for the present at Mount Holly. It doesn't say it, in the Rozelle Ancestral Home, and can be reached by long-distance phone. Because it's a whole nother time zone to Mount Holly. My first little country church was right in the wedge between Stanley County, Rowan County, and Cabarrus County. And we had a budget for phone calls, right? Because it was long distance, just to call people that lived a mile away, because it was just in the next, it was crazy. Anyway, our pastor's living at President Mount Holly. The story of this guy is pretty interesting. It's in one of those newspaper articles. So C.X.L. Rozelle, he lasted 2 years. He'd been ordained as a Methodist pastor, but had never served a church. And it says for health reasons. And for those health reasons, evidently, he left the country for a while and then lived in Texas for a while. You know, people back in those days, they would go somewhere where it was warmer or where they had healing waters or whatever. So he lived in Texas for a long time, got healthier, came back here, and heard about this opportunity for the Myers Park Church and thought, I could do that, but then he could also live in his ancestral home in Mount Holly. Of course, there's no church building yet, so Queens College. We're deeply grateful to Dr. Fraser and the board of Queens College for their hospitality and to making it possible for this church to get its start under such splendid conditions, as the use of its facilities makes sure. I do not have a photo. I've asked my friend David Erdman, who's got a photo of everything old in Charlotte, but he couldn't produce one. So Queens looked something like this back in the 1920s. The first service was held in the Queens College Chapel. And so I thought, oh yeah, I've spoken in that chapel. Actually, this Queens College Chapel that you may know was built in 1950. So its predecessor, I do not know. Couldn't find a photo. Anyway, so other announcements, and I love the next one that we'll dwell on for a few moments. The announcements proclaim Visitation Day. This is Visitation Day in our church. The stewards will visit and invite all Methodists in Myers Park and its borders to join this church. I think it's funny. We have much to offer, and we welcome them too. And then here we go. Our ladies will please fall in line with this movement and invite their friends, as we may miss some in going around. So the ladies, please fall in line. We're going to start this here. Like, ladies, fall in line. And you'll see in the early bulletins and all, women don't have first names unless they are spinsters, shall we say, right? So it's Mrs. James Howell. They don't retain their original name. And you love the image of church in those days. Like, we're going to find the Methodists who live in Myers Park. They're not looking for Presbyterians or anybody or the unchurched. No, we're finding the Methodists, who before this had been commuting into the city to First Methodist, I guess, to Hawthorne Lane. We know some people came out of Hawthorne Lane. But I love that. I mean, back in those days, like, you were a Methodist, and that's just, and you probably were because you grew up as a Methodist. And if you married a Presbyterian, good grief, you had like hard decisions to make. The world's changed, of course, over that, but I love that announcement. Some others come along about Sunday school. It's pretty ambitious. Churches wouldn't do this today. Your first worship service, you're planning Sunday school for the next week. Because back in those days, everybody was in Sunday school. That just was a thing. So I love this. Dr. R.T. Ferguson has been elected general superintendent and Mr. R.L. Campbell assistant superintendent. We will meet in the auditorium at 9:45 and organize. You'd love to be at that meeting, like we're getting organized. We believe we will shortly be in splendid working order. And then, this is great. Each one who desires to teach a class will please be prepared to do so, as assignments will be made at that time. Like, did people come the next Sunday? Like, I've got my lesson. Okay, you've got the 7th graders. Anyway, a pleasing feature of the program will be a soprano solo by Miss Mary Davis. I wonder how old she was. Could be young. Here's a good one. Church music. Hugh, this is how you should do these things. We're glad to announce that, I'm left off of S typing, sorry. We're glad to announce that Miss Elizabeth Starr of Queens College will direct our choir, which ensures its pleasing success. Our choir will necessarily be a chorus. I wonder what that means when it says that.
I have a theory.
Okay.
So it was very popular in the 20s to have solo quartets rather than choirs in churches. And so I suspect that they were suggesting that even though...
Ben's going to give you my start over so our listening audience can...
So in the 1920s, it was quite popular to have solo quartets in uptown churches rather than to have choirs. Choirs were considered somewhat déclassé, a little too Baptist for uptown churches. So the chorus, the idea of a chorus, was a negative term in that sense for more elevated churches. And some of you will know some of this music. We sing some pieces from this time period every now and then. Things like The Holy City by Gaul, or that Jerusalem, Jerusalem, that are very operatic in character. Those were from the earlier times up and through the 20s, and it would have been soloists that would sing for the worship services. And so I think they were making a point of saying we're going to have an actual choir as opposed to that. There are two famous, somewhat familiar material that talk about this that most people have at least heard of. One is called In His Steps, which is a famous old book. And the soloist, one of the main characters who decides, this is known in popular culture through What Would Jesus Do, came about in this book. But one of the soloists in here has decided, she's one of the 4 soloists in this church, the first church of that particular town. And it follows her decision to not sing in church, to not pursue a light opera career, but instead to go sing in the Bowery for the people who are poor, as a way of following Jesus. The other is a famous book and a movie about called A Man Called Peter, which is, many of you might have...
Catherine Marshall.
Peter Marshall, right?
Peter Marshall,
right.
Yes.
And there's a great scene in there where the ladies of the church in Washington are quite upset that he's getting rid of the solo quartet to bring in a choir. And it was one of the big fights he had at that particular church because, similar to ours, he had to redesign the front to make room for a choir. And they thought that was, again, quite inviting the wrong sorts of people to their particular church. So I think that's what they're talking about to make it clear. It would have been unclear in that time period what direction the choirs would go. This is an issue for Protestants that were not Episcopalians. The Episcopalians were very clear about having choristers, male singers and boys. But the other churches, the other Protestant churches, were a little bit indecisive about what to do in this particular time period.
Fascinating. I'm glad you were here. So in those days, they used the Methodist hymnal. They must have borrowed some from another church. I don't really know about that. This is the 1915 edition of the Methodist hymnal, which they used in 25. There was a brand new Methodist hymnal in 1930, so did they have to turn right around and buy a bunch of new hymnals? Who knows? And so the opening hymn, after the organ prelude in the Queens College Chapel, was hymn number 180, All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name, which we will be singing at our worship service, to begin our worship service here on October the 26th. All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name was written by a guy named Edward Perronet, and pretty interesting. In old Methodist hymnals, if you remember any of this, All Hail the Power of Jesus, it must have been hugely popular. It appeared in the hymnal 3 times with 3 different tunes, right? So you know the one, All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name. You have that one, and that's the one that they sang and that we will sing. There's the one I like a little more, just All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name, and fun. And then there was a third tune, Miles Lane, which has now vanished from the hymnal. So it appeared like this, if you see the notes, and they'd have one stanza printed within the music, and then the other stanzas are printed below there. I thought about having to sing it, but I should have had Will come play the piano. That would have been fun to do. So they do All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name, and then the service proceeds, the Apostles' Creed, great. They have a prayer, and then an anthem, Rejoice Ye with Jerusalem. I hunted for a recording of that and couldn't find it. Then they have a scripture reading, which is Psalm 103, which is a more modern look here. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. That would have appeared in the back of the hymnal as a responsive reading, which in those days is how they would have done it. We have psalms responsively in our hymnal. We just haven't done that in recent years. So I printed this out, and I thought we could have a go at this. And you could imagine that you're back there in 1925. So we'll have a responsive reading of Psalm 103. I'll begin. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases,
who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies,
who satisfied thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles.
The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and plenteous in mercy.
I'm planning to preach on this on October 26th, and I will not mention there, this is just a little handy thing that you need. Sometimes people have begun eating, and oops, we forgot to say a blessing. There is a blessing for once you've already begun eating, and it's from Psalm 103. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. That's in that dad joke category. So then they continue. Gloria Patri, after the psalm, it's interesting. The installation of the stewards, they just got that group of men who had formed, they're the initial leaders of the church. They had a prayer over them or something. New Testament lesson, they did not list it in the bulletin. This just really frustrated me. I'd like to have known what it was. And then we come to the offertory, which is that old Handel, I know that my Redeemer liveth. Chad helped me put some recordings in here as you get a feel of what the music was like that first Sunday. Fun to imagine that first group there, and the soloist stands up and sings. You just know it was just so pleasing and delightful and just lovely. Then they sang another hymn, A Charge to Keep I Have. That's a great song for the beginning of a church. Like we have this charge to keep, a God to glorify, a never-dying soul to save, fit it for the sky. And then Excel Rozelle preached his sermon. I'd love to know, what did he say? The newspaper said that he was an extraordinary, powerful, eloquent speaker. I'm glad the newspapers now don't say James Howell is whatever. So they had that. We know the title of the sermon, The Priceless Present. What was that? Then they finished appropriately singing The Church's One Foundation, which is really lovely. And then they went home and began visiting Methodists in the neighborhood. And I'm sure the ladies fell in line. And then they came back that evening for the evening service, and they began the service by singing, I love this hymn, Abide With Me. When we had our hymn sing, when was that, in August, Hugh, we sang Abide With Me. It's one of the evening hymns. There are a bunch of hymns in our hymnal that they're totally geared to be sung in the evening. We don't use them much because we don't have a Sunday night service to sing in the evening, and Abide With Me is such a lovely one, and it's interesting, by the way. So I'm blanking on his name. The author of the words. William Monk, that's right. William Monk wrote this hymn just days before he died. He was a hymn writer, but he fell into ill health and suffered terribly for years, and then declined and declined and declined. And he knew that he was dying. And so he had been reflecting over that passage in Luke chapter 24, right, where the disciples are trudging down the road after the crucifixion, and they hang their heads, and Jesus catches up to them, but they don't recognize him. And he goes on with them, and when they get to the house, one of them says, abide with me, right? So the idea of God abiding with us. So he wrote those words. The music, that was Henry Light, that one, is the author of the words. This is William Henry Monk, who wrote the music, which is equally lovely. He wrote the music because he loved that hymn and decided that it needed a new tune when his 3-year-old daughter had died. And he reflected a lot over the Abide With Me, and he wrote the new tune that we know that's so lovely. And then we have another piece of work that was sung that night, the O Lord, How Manifold Are Thy Works. Listen to a bit of this. It had to have been a solo, not a chorus, but this is all I could find. I kind of like that one, Hugh. We ought to use that soon. So then after the, O Lord, how manifold are thy works, we have a scripture lesson. Again, text unknown. And then we come to the offertory. I guess they'd aligned ushers by that time to go around and collect the money. They didn't have online giving and such then, so that probably was the offering, right? And we have Miss Elizabeth Starr, again, age unknown, singing Come Ye Blessed from Gaul's Holy City. The music looks like this, and we found a video of a woman singing it to give you a little bit of the feel.
Then shall the King say, Come, 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 ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom.
We have about 7 minutes of that. I'll spare you all of it. It's interesting, isn't it? The style of music that they thought, oh, this is the way to begin. This is pleasing. It is pleasing, right? This is pleasing music, and it's kind of been a signature of our church ever since, so having music, which is amazing. And then they sang, Savior, thy dying love, thou gavest me, another lovely hymn. Another sermon by C.X.L. Rozelle. I don't know how you get 2 sermons in a week. That's amazing. Of course, I have Baptist friends that do Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, 3 sermons. If I preach 3 sermons, it would so not be good. And then after the sermon by the pastor, and we know the title of it, Challenge of the Cross, there was a violin solo. Isn't that interesting? Was that a volunteer? They pay somebody to come in. Miss Alfreda Sharp played a violin solo. Don't know what it was. And then we come to the closing hymn, O Love That Wilt Not Let Me Go, which is a great way to end the service. You'd love to be able to go back and see what that was like, how many people were there. And then just briefly, news begins to come out over time. They selected a site for the church. News stories about that you can read. They bought this community store, this location, tore it down, built the sanctuary that we know, and continue to have services. So anyway, that's my look into the very first worship service, which I think is neat and telling about the culture. That last news article, by the way, and the print's hard to see, but it quotes one of the church stewards saying, we have a dream that this church will endure and do great things. It's kind of cool. Like at the very founding, you dream. Like, did they dream they didn't dream this in particular, but they dreamed that this would be a great church one day. They were really thinking, we need a church for Methodists in Myers Park. And fortunately, the world has changed, so we're not a church for Methodists in Myers Park. It's a broader kind of thing, which everyone can be grateful for. Okay, this is my shortest program in human history. 25 minutes. Let me ask if you have questions. We have some resident historians here who know stuff. So, Lori. Well, hang on. Let me get Ben to run around with the mic, which he's always great to do.
Well, I was just wondering about the sanctuary because we built, if we were a small church just starting, we built a magnificent sanctuary, and what the vision must have been to have built something like that. I mean, this doesn't exist anywhere else. So wonder what the thinking was behind that.
I wish I knew numbers, and David, maybe you know more than I do. How many people were there the first Sunday? By year 4, how many people there? But they were meeting in a store. The news story says it was a spacious store, but it's a store. You could see the building. Couldn't have been too many people. So they had to have built for larger than they needed. And it wasn't... When I did the program with Tom Hanchett on sort of the history of the neighborhood of Myers Park, one of the things we had were photos inside the sanctuary, and it looked very different from the sanctuary we have now. Pulpit was in the center, choir was banked behind the pastors, old school, what churches used to be like. Somebody came in here and asked if I was going to be in period dress, which I chose not to do that. Way back in the day, Methodist clergy preached in a tuxedo. And you could ask, what did the women clergy wear? There were no women. There were no women clergy. And then they went to black robes for several generations, and then kind of embarked on the kind of alb and white that we see now. But it would be interesting, the first Sunday in that sanctuary, how many people were there, right? It's just so interesting. We just don't know. Okay, David.
Just an interesting thing about Excel Rozelle, my understanding is prior to when he was hired here, he may have had a church, but he also was the superintendent of Mount Holly schools. And also, can you imagine that he would have to drive from Mount Holly to this church every day? But the good news is in December that year, he moved into the parsonage on Brandon Road. So that's just a little tidbit.
And people say, Methodist even when I came here, people asked, are you going to move in 4 years? People have this old thing that Methodist pastors moved every 4 years. Excel Rozelle lasted 2 years. His successor lasted 1 year. His successor lasted 2 years. And then we came to Reverend Combs, who made it, I think, 5. But in the first 6 years of the church, they had 4 pastors. Why? I have no idea what the answer to that would be. All right, Melvin. Melvin almost was here for that original service.
I did know Excel Rozelle, not when he established this church. I wasn't born for 8 more years. But I knew him in the late 60s. He came and preached a preaching mission for us in Thomasville. And so I got to know him pretty well, and he was a right jovial fellow, and he was a lot bigger in the 60s and 70s than he was in that photo.
Not taller. You don't
Not
mean
taller.
taller.
He was rounder.
He was bigger.
He had been eating at the Rozelle house, I assume.
So there's the historic house is out there. It's kind of Paw Creek, almost. It's on Rosal's Ferry Road. I forget the address.
Yeah,
You can
Rosal's
Google
Ferry.
it and you can find that.
They used to have a restaurant called the Rozelle House.
And that burned down at some point.
Yeah, it burned down when I was serving as Minister of Education at First Methodist, which had evening services, by the way, in addition to morning. In the 60s, we would eat out there sometimes at Rozelle House.
Yeah. If you don't know Melvin McIntosh, he was one of our pastors here for how many years were you here, Melvin? 17 years. All right. Yes, Catherine. I'm trying for Bill Roth's record. He's got. Yes.
I'm afraid of a microphone. I don't know. Excuse me.
Go ahead.
I don't know if I read this in Mary Kratt's History of Myers Park, but I always thought Myers Park Methodist was formed in the home of Buck Duke, the trustee.
I can't hear you very well. I don't know if others can. Sorry. There you are.
This may make me sing. But that Buck Duke gathered the stewards or the people that powers that be in his living room, and I always thought that was the beginning of Myers Park Methodist.
So there was a living room meeting among these people. Some were from Hawthorne Lane. One included Louis Asbury, who was the architect of the building. I, by the way, interviewed last week Louis Asbury III, his grandson. Gave me a great interview about his grandfather and his work and so on. Lived on Brandon Road and so on. He was one of the members of this, one of the founding members of this church. So they did meet in a living room, but for the actual, I can't think of the word, consecration of we're going to be a congregation, and here's the pastor, the bishop and the district superintendent came, was in the the Rozelle ancestral home, according to what I've read in these newspaper accounts.
Buck Duke's house happened. I'm just curious. 20 years later, 10 years later?
I can't hear you at all.
When did the meeting happen at Duke Mansion? Is what the question was.
Mr. Duke died in 1925. My understanding is they first met on the front porch of Dr. J.T. Ferguson's house. So I don't think Mr. Duke had really anything He never contributed financially. He died in 1925. But so I'm not sure about the others.
Yeah, we'll have to run that down and get a little more accuracy on that. All right, what else? Yes.
I noticed that James J. Akers was the first chairman of the Board of Stewards.
Yeah.
I don't remember him. Is that Mary Cratt over there? I don't remember him, but I remember his wife well. And the home that they lived in, at least when I knew them, is out on Sardis Road, and it's recently been preserved. I think the Levine organization recently bought it and has preserved it. When I knew it, it was about 20 acres and a beautiful stone home. My mother and I lived close by, and we would often go by and pick up Mrs. Akers and bring her to Sunday school and church. And she was often late. They had and that bothered me because I was anxious to get to Sunday school. They had a pool, and in the summertime, she would often take a swim in the pool and be a little late getting out and getting dressed, and she was often continuing to get dressed when she got to the car. And I was also wondering if you have a list of the charter members, the 151 charter members. I'd just like to look over that list. I'm sure I would know, David. Oh, it is? Okay. I'm sure I know a good many of them. But
Yeah. Do you know there's an archives room? Do you know that we have such a thing? And David will lead you there when this is over. So over in the old building. David and Sarah Sumner have kind of taken over for Joyce Gossett, who is our great archivist and historian for so long. Did a wonderful job. Will Timms.
So a little more kind of interested in the history. So when, if there's any record of this, when did there start occurring more than one worship service here? Because I know at one point later in the history, the contemporary service started, but when was there an addition of one additional traditional service, if there's any record of that?
So we know when we began to have a contemporary service. That was not that long ago. That was during the time that Ron Robinson was here. And for our 8:45 service on the 100th anniversary Sunday, Ron will be preaching in that service, which he's excited about. He was so excited to be asked to do that, and seemed like the fitting person. But a second service, my father-in-law and I talked about this at one time. I think it was when Lisa's dad, Tom Stockton, was here. They'd only had one service till then, and that was sometime between 1975 and 1983. So having three services started under James Howell. It's my fault. It's my fault. Yes, Jamie.
So with Myers Park being a fairly affluent neighborhood today, I'm assuming it was back then. And so, and with a lot of corporate leaders and such of Charlotte. And so with the development of a Methodist church then, do you have any sense from articles and stuff how that was seen in the city, that this church was sort of being, I assume, put together by community leaders? And then were there any other churches in Myers Park that possibly it was drawing from? I realized they were searching for Methodists, but...
This morning when I was taking a shower, I thought, somebody's going to ask me when the other Myers Park churches. Does anybody know that? David? Hang on. We want to preserve your comments for posterity.
Must be nice to be young, it can run. In Myers Park, you had a little church on the lane, started here in 1920. These aren't all Methodist churches, and I don't know of any other Methodist churches. Then 1 year after we were chartered, Myers Park Presbyterian Church was chartered, and then Myers Park Baptist not until, I'm not answering your question or not, Myers Park Baptist was not until the 40s. So we were it, I guess. They had a little church on the lane on the Hawthorne, but that's Elizabeth. So
And to your question, how it was viewed, I don't know that. You can only imagine, though, that in a city like Charlotte in those days, you had working class people, you had poor, you still had farmers and such. This was way out in the country. I mean, from the program that Tom Hanchett and I did, this was like way out. There had to be some kind of, what would the word be, admiration or envy, one spilling into the other, for people who could live at such a place. I mean, the Duke family had a home, all this. Yeah.
I had a question about the founding of Crisis Assistance Ministry. I saw in the hall that we were part of the founding of Habitat for Humanity, but I was recommending Crisis Assistance to someone who was going to donate some clothing. Were we part of the founding of that? And if so, who else was involved?
Yeah, I'll let David take the mic, but yes, and they're half as old as we are. They're 50 years old. Yeah, so yes, we and other churches here went into the forming of crisis assistance. It's kind of interesting. It's like the church woke up to the fact that we have poor people in town, and the churches have a responsibility there. Like that, oddly, that wasn't a thing for a long time in church life. So 50 years ago, Crisis was formed. After that, Habitat was formed by a group that came to be after that called the Jeremiah 29:7 churches. This week I'm preaching on Jeremiah 29 as part of the 100th anniversary thing. I'm going to mention this. It'd be a spoiler alert. Just wait till Sunday. I'll give you the good story on that. But Habitat was formed out of this and 6 other churches.
United Way was a big part.
Oh, United Way. David, you got bias with United Way, though. Yeah.
And I was just going to add, like in the mid 70s into the mid 80s, there was a lot of kind of recognition of the churches in the Myers Park area of how can we support people that need our help, like through forming Crisis Assistance Ministry, Habitat for Humanity, and that Jeremiah group tried some experiments with different things, like a share-a-home for older adults to live together in one home with a house manager. And that was effective for a short amount of time, but they tried some different things like that to address needs in the community.
Cool. Yeah, John, I keep being answered in your question. I'm thinking about how this could be related. Greg Jarrell wrote a book called Our Trespasses. Correct. And so what Greg traced is, once upon a time, Charlotte was just inner city Charlotte as we know it, the 4 wards. People began to move to the suburbs, and so the question for First Baptist, which had been downtown, but they had what they thought was an inadequate facility, they wanted to build a larger church. So Greg narrates this whole story. They looked at moving way out here, like where we are, and they thought, we don't want to go that far out. So they went into Second Ward and basically forced out, it's an ugly story, forced out a couple of the black churches with no compensation. One of them is Friendship Baptist, which has survived and thrived, but Friendship Baptist was just taken down and destroyed with nothing. And they went out and found their own church, and they're doing just fine. So some of the churches were doing that. They were moving out of the inner city and starting churches, and I wonder, racially at least, if there was some resentment around patterns of development in Charlotte, period. One of the things we talked about with the Tom Hanchett program is when they laid down, name it, Independence Boulevard, Interstate 77, any of those things, where did they put it? Well, they didn't put it down Providence Road, right? So those powerful people who formed these churches, they really controlled what happened in the city. So a road like 77 cut through all the poor black neighborhoods of Charlotte. So you wonder if there was kind of some overall resentment for that class of people who gathered a lovely life for themselves, but sometimes at the expense of other people in the city. So I don't know how this church would fit into that. What else?
Thinking of the class things, James mentioned sort of off the cuff about people wearing tuxedos. Ministers wore tuxedos. The tuxedo had just been invented in 1920. It was not a. It was a weird and interesting little story. The Methodist minister would have thought the tuxedo was fairly casual, not dress up like we imagine. Franz Liszt was the first composer to wear tails performing on the piano, and it was so he could dress as well as his audience, because he thought he was every bit as equal to the ladies and gentlemen that were at the concert. So before that time, Mozart, Haydn, even Wagner would have worn a servant's uniform, a livery, when they were performing. So it was a big step up. But the tuxedo was a step down from white tie and tails, which was appropriate to wear. The tuxedo was invented in the 1910s at the Tuxedo Club outside of New York. And it became very popular when the Duke, the Prince of Wales wore it once. And then suddenly it was allowed. You're allowed to wear the tuxedo. So it's just a bizarre story. But in the 1920s, the tuxedo would have been fairly new and somewhat fashionable, but not formal in the way that we think of. It would have been early evening wear or something you wouldn't wear to a real event.
I don't know if you've seen the ads where Peyton Manning says, "I'm more than just Peyton Manning. Hugh Floyd is more than just Hugh." He knew the history of the tuxedo. And I'll tell my latest tuxedo story. Lisa and I went to a wedding in New York, and it was black ties. I had to haul that stuff up there, and it's outside. And we go outside. It's been hot all week, all day. We get to the wedding, and we're out there, and it starts almost an hour late. And we're like, what happened? We still don't know what happened. During that hour, gale force winds came up, so women's hair, it's a disaster. But also the temperature dropped to about 20 degrees. Well, all the women are in like these sleeveless, and so the men lost their tuxedo jackets. I thought I'd brought my tuxedo jacket to New York so Lisa could be warm, which was hilarious. All right, David had something.
James mentioned how, we are a regional church now, but, back in the day, I'm third generation, so my grandfather was one of 3 members of Luther Snyder class, 3 mayors of Charlotte. So this church was, it really was business leaders and political leaders that got stuff done. But I have to tell you a quick story. I was at annual conference in the late 90s, and people would come up to me and ask me, what church do you belong to? I say, Myers Park Methodist. They go, oh. So thank goodness we're not a neighborhood church. Well, we are, but we are a regional church, and there's so much more diversity. Not everybody in this church is rich, okay? So I'm just preaching to the choir here.
Oh, that's funny. We talk about a lot of old church stuff, but you have these photos of these Sunday school. Everybody was in Sunday school back in the days, but you had men's classes and women's classes. You never see photos of the women's classes, but you have photos of these men's classes. It's like 150 guys, and they're all dressed, of course, and they look amazing. And I'll never forget my first church. I had a couple in the church. They were really old. And they narrated how in 1912 they got married, and they created this great scandal in the church because they came in the church the first week after they were married, and they sat together. Because men sat on one side and women sat on the other side, and they were the first ones to sit together, and there was a big huff and uproar. And then Ernest, he was so funny. Later he would say, after about a month, everybody sat together. It was like, it was too funny. Church life. I always think about that story that you told. Churches publish histories, and we have one. It's in that gold book. And to me, they're always just frightfully boring. It's names and dates and when buildings were built. And somebody should really keep a church history of the funny stuff. We did a thing when I was up in Davidson. I kind of narrated this. They said, well, let's have a gathering of the older people and talk about the real history of the church. So we got together, and this one older guy, James Alexander, that Lisa would know, he was just a funny storyteller, and he said, what should be in the church history was the Sunday that, he named some guy. John got up during the service from the choir, and he spoke to Jim out there and said, Jim, your dog got in my chicken coop and ate one of my chickens, like middle of the service. Like, that's the good stuff of church life. It's her getting out of the swimming pool and coming. Anyway, two funny things that happen. Those are the interesting church history stuff. My favorite church member, speaking again.
Some people were asking about the folks that were the early leaders and when the church started, and there's a newspaper article out there, and it's also typed up so you can read it a little better on a stand, and it names a lot of those folks if you're interested. Also, the Acres House on Sardis Road is, there's a lot of different programs that happen there. If you're ever interested in Preserve Mecklenburg, often posts and has programs in that house which has been preserved.
We have a podcast that I and others have recorded that are going to be appearing. Our church website has a section that's dedicated to the 100th anniversary. And some of them are just fascinating. I talked to Rufus Dalton, 100 years old. Lawrence McCluskey, one of our former senior pastors, gave a great interview. He talked about Excel Roxell and that he knew him and had a very funny encounter with his wife. I won't tip you off to the story, just listen to it. It's a great, great story from Mrs. Excel Roxell. Jamie.
So technically, this is not my question, so therefore I feel like I can ask it. But my
Asking for a friend.
My YouTube watching mother in Florida asked me when I said I was coming to this, do you have any sense of what were the issues that would have been discussed or been part of the sermons? Like in today, we've got church fractures and societal and political and all that. Then it might have been, women had recently got the vote, prohibition was going on. Do you have any sense of what was being preached about beyond sort of the specific scriptures themselves?
Well, what was going on in the 20s is amazing. I just, the author's name has escaped me. God, I hate getting older. Just read a book that was a history of the 1920s, fascinating period, a heady time in America, as it was, happy days and success and everything. The crash was coming, but was not there yet. One thing that we're pretty sure of is that preaching on the social issues of the day didn't go on much. It did some, but in some places, but it was more large urban areas where some preachers were beginning to address the crises that were so obvious, from slums and homelessness and so on. So you had the gospel, the social gospel coming along about that time. But on the whole, and I bet in a place like this, there wasn't a lot of talk about the social issues of the day. Some people are pretty sure that shouldn't go on today as well. Hang on, Lee's got the mic.
I just wondered if there was anything documented about like the start of a children's program, or did people bring their children to Sunday school, or were they left at home with help, or, yeah?
At the beginning, they had to have brought their children into the church, right? But and if they got organized at Queens for Sunday school, and they didn't have a whole lot of rooms, and you don't know. I had this hunch. I don't know this. I bet in 1925, if people took their children out in public, those children were very well behaved. I don't know that, but I bet that's correct. I'm not saying that's even a good or a bad thing. Yes, okay. Troy Ann.
Yes, when did the Methodist Church drop the Episcopal?
Yeah. This is interesting. Way back in the day, of course, it was Episcopalians who became the first Methodist, and they really thought we were just Reformed Episcopalians. So the early church in America was called the Methodist Episcopal Church. Over slavery, there came to be a division, sadly, into two denominations: the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church south. They weren't purely defined geographically. I know I worked one summer in Kingsport, Tennessee, and there were two churches next door to each other. One was some new denomination, and the other was the United Methodist Church. But decades ago, one was a Methodist Episcopal Church, and the other was a Methodist Episcopal Church South, next door to one another. So you had some who we're going to be in that South church, and it was defined by, we're a church that supports slavery. It's embarrassing to think about, but that was like a big thing, and they did talk about that in churches, and they had all their rationale for why the Bible supports slavery. I mean, you imagine all these things. But there in Kingsport, Tennessee, you had another group of people said, we're going to split off, and we're going to be with the Methodist Episcopal Church. This church was Methodist Episcopal Church South. That stayed that way until 1968. When we merged with the Evangelical United Brethren, and Eric, can you help me on this, or Hannah? There was another group, I'm forgetting who they were. The Evangelical United Brethren and somebody else, and we merged and became the United Methodist Church in 1968. And everybody had changed their signs. And now you see the church, it's interesting, the churches that left the United Methodist Church, they've had to all go change their signs. And some, they haven't changed it very well. It's just like crossed out. Like, we're not united anymore.
This is not a social issue, but there was a moral issue, and I don't know exactly what the years were, but at one time, I don't know how, if this was a requirement, but they asked Methodists to take a teetotaler's oath. Does anybody remember that? Yeah.
She said she remembered her dad hesitating to sign that. Lisa's dad couldn't remember when clergy were ordained, you had to promise not to drink, but you also had to promise not to smoke. It was interesting because that was early when we didn't really understand all that much about smoking. It almost was regarded more as bad form than this will cause cancer. So fascinating to think about. You have another funny church history story for us? That was good.
No, I was just hoping you would say a little something about Luther Snyder and how important he was for this church early on.
Yeah, so Luther Snyder, we have the Snyder building, we have the Luther Snyder class that's merged with a bunch of people by now. There's a massive portrait of him outside our sanctuary now, hanging there. There are three portraits there, by the way. One is Lisa's dad, the other is Lawrence McCluskey, who's going to be with us on the 26th of Game of the Great podcast. Somebody asked me if my painting would be there one day, and the answer is no. And the way you get a painting is you get elected a bishop in the church. Those are the two. And the angels are coming for us. But there's also a painting of Luther Snyder there. And David, tell about Luther Snyder. I thought that's whose house the original meeting was in, but no.
He came over maybe 29, somewhere in there from Hawthorne Lane Methodist. But he was to Coca-Cola what J.B. Duke was to tobacco. The largest Coca-Cola bottling center in the United States is in Charlotte, North Carolina, because of him. So he was a big executive. But he promised the congregation in '39, if you pay off the debt on the sanctuary, I'll pay for the educational building, which he did. He also paid at least $10,000 for the bells in the tower in 1947. But he did a lot of philanthropic things for the church. But yeah, and I think his home was where Carroll Hall condominiums are. Am I right? Is that right? You should be on the history committee, by the way. Anyway.
So our since David said that, I'd point out the differential between the money we raised for Hope is Here and the total cost of the building and our affordable housing projects is only $800,000. And if any of you wish to be the next Luther Snyder, we'll put your portrait in the hallway. Liza, wait till the mic comes.
Do we know what the cost was to build the sanctuary?
We do, and it was in my previous program, and I can't remember how much it was. I think it was like $130,000. How much? No, it was less than that. Yeah, it was 130. We had the exact number because we had the. I showed at the previous program the actual bill of the cost. It was like $130-something thousand.
And I assume the people who started it, got together, were those that helped finance that.
One would assume. One would assume. We can't hear you. Hang on.
As I remember the story, Mr. Dalton, Rufus's dad, was involved in it, and the first people involved in collecting the money, I think, came up a little short. And they went back to Mr. Snyder, and he made up the difference, whatever that was.
Yeah,
but
so,
I think the cost, I believe David's right on the cost. I think the estimate was much less than that. And they overran, they spent more than the estimate, or they were going to spend more. And they went back to Mr. Snyder and said, look, we've done all we can do, and he came up with the difference. Now, that's the story I remember.
Yeah. If any of you wish to play that role, just call me.
Sorry, I dare try to correct James. I'm in big trouble here. But so the history, that book that you mentioned, and the history that Gil Adams put together, the original estimate was $150,000. It ended up being $250,000. And when it happened, people were not upset about it. I mean, I just read some of that this morning. But anyway, and again, Luther Snyder didn't make up the difference on the sanctuary. He challenged the congregation to pay the debt off, and then he paid for the educational building. That's what the history says.
I shouldn't tell you this. I had a guy years ago offer to play that role for our church. If you have a shortfall, I will pay that off. I said, I declined that offer. You shouldn't have one guy doing that. It's our church. Like we're all the co-investors, owners in that. He's died and gone on, so it's past tense now. But interesting. All right, anything else? We're at noon now. Thank you all for coming. This is great fun.